Earlier this year, I was just saying this in the break, earlier this year, of course, Pope Francis, our new pontiff, came out and said that American Catholics need to stop being so obsessed with abortion and gay marriage and contraception. Those are three things Jesus never talked about, and rather focus on the social justice issues of helping the least among us, which is what Jesus talked about. Matthew 25, that great separating the sheep from the goats parable, Jesus comes out and lays down his marching orders. You take care of the sick, you take care of the poor, you be nice to those in prison, you look out for the least among us, which is why there's a rich tradition in this country of Christians using Scripture to bring about social justice. The very first act of protest by Europeans on our soil was, of course, Father Bartholomew de las Casas, who was on Columbus's boat, and he was the one who wrote back to Queen Isabella discussing the disgusting human rights abuses and torture Columbus was inflicting on the indigenous peoples. The first act of protest, Catholic priest. And it continues to this day, and that's why I'm really, really pleased to welcome to the show the pastor of the 19th Street Baptist Church, Derrick Harkins, to talk with us about Fast for Families. Pastor, good morning. Welcome to the Bill Press Show.
It's great to be with you early this morning.
Early, yes. It's painful. We're up before the Amish farmers get up for milking. But in building on what I said, I it's very inspiring to see this, because a lot of times when you watch, and there's progressive Christians listening to this, and there's also cool atheist friends who get along with their cool Christian friends. But if you turn on TV, all you really see of faith, it tends to be either atheists or creeps screaming at women outside clinics. Yeah. And all too often, the good work that spiritual people of any background, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Scientologist, the good deeds usually go unreported. There's not a lot of drama. And so it was really heartening to see Sister Simone Campbell's crusade get some coverage last year. And now what you're doing here in D.C. is getting some coverage. And I'd love to ask you about how Fast for Families began.
Sure. Well, first of all, and I love the fact that you point to the long-standing tradition in terms of people of faith really understanding the importance of social advocacy and having an underpinning of the ethics and morality of justice and fair treatment. And so there's already a seedbed for this. I mean, when you think about fasting, the names that immediately come to mind for me are Cesar Chavez and Mohandas Gandhi and
Bobby Sands.
Exactly. And I think what it speaks to is the fact that there's an incredible measure of momentum and a sort of a deeper sense of commitment that can be seen when somebody's really making that level of commitment. And we've been down on the mall, and I say we because there are a number of us who've been in solidarity with the core fasters who've now been on the mall for 10 days without food, and have been there to obviously press the case that our broken immigration system really tears apart families and is really counterproductive to everything that I think that conservatives as well as progressives would think are the best American ideals. So there's a dimension of this fast that's really, I think, more than a lot of folk expected. I think I was telling you earlier that a number of elected officials have come down from the Hill because the tent is literally right at the foot of Capitol Hill.
Yes, I saw it last night.
And I think a lot of them have come, maybe thinking, well, this is your run-of-the-mill photo op or press op that I'll be a part of, and have really come away transformed because of the commitment, the resolve of the people who are there.
And fasting is something we don't hear about too much as a protest. If you look on the protest spectrum, with 10 being dousing yourself with kerosene and setting yourself on fire, and 1 being commenting on the Daily Beast, I'd have to say, fasting is pretty serious. And I have a lot of questions for you about it. And I want to highlight that fasting and hunger strikes aren't the same thing.
Absolutely.
But tell me how this demonstration began and what it's all about. What is the cause?
Well, a number of groups who have gathered around this, SCIU, PICO, Faith in Public Life, Sojourners, National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference. I mean, there's a wide range of folk who and I'm not naming by any stretch of the imagination all of the groups who are part and who are being network, who are supportive of this, have understood the fact that where we stand right now, for example, the fact that the Senate bill that has passed for immigration reform is there. We know that all that remains between comprehensive immigration reform being enacted and where it is now is approval or a vote in the House. Mm-hmm. And so there's a focused objective there to compel the leadership of the House to understand that. So that's kind of part of the initial onus that we're bringing to this. And then the fact that we've seen this moment so often before. We saw it with the DREAM Act. We saw it, obviously, back in 2007, that we've gotten so close. And I think there's been a real concern, or I should say there's a real sense amongst people of faith and others, too, that maybe now, because we are once again close, let's bring to this a dimension of commitment and faith and resolve that's coupled with all the strategy that goes on up in the hill. But let's have some folk in a tent who are praying, who are making the real commitment to the discipline and the sacrifice of fasting, again, because of that great tradition that we're talking about, and really press this case. And obviously, the way that spreads out is the attention that it brings to the issue, and the people, again, I think, who were really transformed by this.
Pastor, I just spent a couple of months on the road working on a documentary about the American Dream for PBS, talking with young dreamers, with young people who were brought here as children and are now, thanks to DACA, able to stay here and work, but in many cases their parents still face deportation. 3 weeks ago, I was in Montgomery, Alabama, talking to a woman whose husband is facing deportation. And there's so much disinformation about what undocumented folks are facing. The biggest one being that this is an amnesty bill. Yeah. That's what Ronald Reagan did. That's not what this is. Right. This is actually a rather long, painful, costly path to citizenship.
Absolutely. And I mean, to be honest with you, from a progressive viewpoint, I mean, I would even say I would like to see, an option for immigration reform that was less onerous. But the reality is even that represents a forward move, to even, because you hear people say, well, one of the elements is to, have to get at the back of the line, and however many years there will be in terms of waiting for the process to unfold.
It's over 10 years.
It's over 10 years.
And thousands of dollars in fines as well.
And keep in mind that when you say that, you're talking about people who, and you're right, to put this to the lie, you're talking about people who already are productive in our economy, who already are paying taxes, oftentimes because, they don't have the benefit of tax-free mortgage interest or whatever, who are paying a higher tax rate oftentimes than documented citizens.
So they're also paying a higher tax rate than many of the churches demonizing them for being here in this country.
How about many churches who pay no taxes?
Well, I mean, we have to remind, and everyone listening has to remind all your anti-immigrant friends, no one's disputing that these folks have broken the law in coming over here. Ask an Indian how he feels about hearing white people call others illegal sometimes. But you make a very important point. Undocumented workers in our midst are paying state taxes, they're paying federal taxes, and they're paying sales taxes. They're already contributing to your economy and making it better.
Absolutely. And so to your point, or your question about really what the genius of all of this was, is the fact that it just makes sense. I mean, it makes moral sense. Obviously, there are many of us who see it as making theological sense, and the fact that we are at a point where there's really not much argument left to be had.
That's where we'll disagree.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll say let me put it this way, from a rational, logical basis, there's not much argument left to be had.
I agree. And from a moral basis, there's not much argument left to be had. But from an electoral basis, it's one thing for senators to recognize that you don't get the White House without 70% of the Hispanic vote. And it's in the interest of any party to embrace this. However, we know that there are many, many congressmen in districts, mostly down south, that don't really care about this issue. And they would actually lose the support of their base if they were to embrace something that's been called dishonestly an amnesty bill. Marco Rubio himself staked his entire political career and his presidential aspirations on the Gang of Eights bill in the Senate, and now he has dropped that. I'm sure you've noticed, Pastor, like a hot rock. He's talking about abortion in every speech. This weekend he was bashing gays again. He does not talk about the need for immigration reform anymore. One of the authors of this bill has seemingly abandoned it because the GOP is so opposed to it, even if it hurts their White House chances for decades to come.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting because when the DREAM Act was up for a vote, I think a lot of folk thought that this was low-hanging fruit. This made so much sense because obviously, as you just sort of unfolded, the reality for Dreamers is that they're already, again, woven into the fabric of American society.
Yeah.
And the fact that a bill like that would not pass, I think, is indicative of what you're talking about, that we've got a situation now where there are folk who are so stratified, so oppositional, and it's because, again, you're right, they're, in redistricting, hey, here you go. This is the result, that you've got districts now where there's no larger sense of, I love this word, you don't hear it often, the commonweal, the fact that there should be a larger sense of commitment to a sort of a transcending idea that's bigger than your congressional district and certainly bigger than your own sort of isolated set of interests. And unfortunately, that's not the case.
We are talking with pastor of the 19th Street Baptist Church, Derrick Harkins, about Fast for Families. And I think you're exactly right. And one of the arguments we often hear is from our right-wing Christian friends, when you talk about using democracy to better the lives of others, you'll hear, yeah, well, Jesus said to help the poor and the suffering, but he didn't say that the government should force us at gunpoint to do it. I do private charity, and I'm nice to people, and I don't see why the government should hold a gun to my head and make me take care of the poor, blah, 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 Benghazi. No, these people never once complained when their tax dollars were used for war and occupation in Iraq. They don't like seeing their tax dollars used to help the least among us. And tell me if you disagree, but to me, that's an abdication of the role Christianity plays in democracy. Yeah, Jesus never talked about this because Jesus didn't live under democracy. He lived under imperial rule.
Right.
But if you're a believer in the values of Christ and you're a believer in democracy and you believe in using democracy to create a more Christian society, on earth as it is in heaven,
right,
I have no problem with the government based on Christian values. It's just that involves being really nice to people on a legislative basis.
Yeah. Well, and I think the problem is you're right. You can't mix metaphors. You can't say, well, because Jesus didn't speak to the idea of how to function in a capitalist society, therefore, we need to understand the way Jesus talked about these things.
Yeah, Jesus didn't talk about gay people either.
He didn't talk about gay people, and I think that the point is that when you, for example, when you think about what's one of the very first things that the church, when it evolved in Acts, what did they do? They shared amongst themselves as each person had need.
Well, I always say Obamacare is not a blueprint for socialism. You're thinking of Acts of the Apostles.
Exactly.
That book will blow your mind, and it really is opt-in communism.
And so to say that there isn't a mandate to be have concern and care for again the larger community is just you're right. It runs contradictory to, I think, what's the consistent message in Christianity, and really, to be honest, in largely every faith tradition. So you're right. I think there's an understanding, and along with it, there's just a practical understanding. Elizabeth Warren has a wonderful. I do it disservice to call it a riff, but she has a wonderful statement that she's made about the fact that when you talk about independent business owners and how they shouldn't be taxed because this is obviously from the right, and then she talks about the streets that lead to their factories,
yes,
obviously by the public commonweal, the police who enforce the areas around them, the utilities that run into
You
them.
didn't build that speech.
You didn't, exactly.
Which the president tried to rip off rather indelicately last year, and it led to a world of hurt for him because he didn't express it as well as she did.
Exactly. So, but the point still stands is that if we talk about this from a context of faith, or from an absolutely valid, secular humanist context, it still makes sense to say, well, we've got to care about the larger good.